thinkers that have really influenced education in the US and internationally are people like John Dewey and Paulo Freire. And the main critique that I have of Dewey and Freire, look, Dewey is well known for his views of experiential education, thinking of the classroom as an experiment, eliciting from students their creativity and tinkering with things. But the problem with Dewey is that he doesn't think that there's a role for tradition or preserving past knowledge in education. Knowledge is always forward-looking. It's always experimental. It's always progressive. Towards the end of his life, Dewey acknowledged that there had to be some other end to education, but he kind of ended up making it the social end of sustaining democracy. But Dewey, although he's thought of more as an innovator in education, he was a philosopher, and he explicitly rejected an element of Maritain understanding of the person, which I aver is the understanding of the person in most wisdom traditions and most religious traditions, which is that each human person is endowed with a soul that cannot be reduced to one or another social role. And that soul has the capacity for direct communication with our Creator. Now, I'm not denying that God is immanent and involved in the world, but for Dewey, the only way we could talk about God was through action in the world. But this formation of the inner conscience, this ability to judge right and wrong, this love for the truth, for Dewey gets completely subsumed to one or another social or political end. Similarly, for Paulo Freire, whose book on education is entitled Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Paulo Freire replaces truth-seeking and the formation of the conscience of the individual person. He replaces that as the end of education and says the end of education is consciousness raising based on problem solving. But again, Freire's method of dialogue and bringing students to think about their social and political context may sound like, hey, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you read Freire's entire book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, it's very clear. He spells it out very clearly, especially in chapter 4, that the problem they're trying to solve is capitalist oppression. And his exemplars in education include people like Chairman Mao and Che Guevara, who ultimately didn't believe in the dignity of the person and were perfectly happy to engage in violence against people who didn't agree with their version of the truth. So consciousness raising and dialogue for Freire may sound good, but it's got to be oriented to his understanding of revolution. And if it's not, there's not freedom, because you're undermining the ultimate goal, which is a social political one. So again, Maritain's focus on the inner dynamism of the student and the freedom of conscience of the student as the means and ends of education is a warning that education should not be uniquely controlled by government or only done in schools. Maritain's vision, as well as the vision of an author named Luigi Giussani, his book, Risk of Education, they're worried that educational systems that embrace a notion of collective political liberation, but reject personal liberation, become very easy to turn into another kind of collective God that subjugates the freedom of the individual to one or another political goal. For Giussani, words like solidarity completely lose their meaning if you do not have respect for the mystery of each person's conscience, which is capable of connecting with a transcendent God.